Preston paced the dimly lit apartment in a listless Parkinsonian gait, back and forth, end to end. From his bedroom at the end of the hall, past the bathroom and guest bedroom, air handler closet to the living room, and back again. Feeling his way in the deepening darkness that weighed too heavy to ignore, he entered his bedroom and collapsed upon his twin-size bed, his eyes fixated on the faint rotating blades of the ceiling fan. Outside his bedroom window bayed the enigmatic sounds of night, mewling and whispers both hither and yon throughout the darkness, the indecipherable muted colloquy of strange men. And Preston pondered which of the audibles were real and which ones were created by his restless imagination. Occasionally he felt the presence of someone or something standing in the corners beyond his sight, but he attributed it to insomnia. His muscles ached and his joints crackled from the labor of a workday he could not remember. How many of those pills was I supposed to take? He thought aloud. Better question, why weren't they working? Sound sleep was all he wanted. A sound. Peaceful, painless, and hopefully a never-waking hibernation. Though the nightly musings of an eternal repose were ephemeral at best, they left loitering inquiries. He'd grin in self-deprecation. Who'd find me? He was not important enough to be praised or missed, nor infamous to be given such attention. He was a model employee and citizen, one who paid his taxes, got to work on time, and even paid his rent 2 months in advance. Besides, he thought, I would not want to inconvenience the neighbors with the stench of rotting flesh. In addition, the floor manager at the post office relied on his forbearing temperament and breakless hours of moving the holiday mail out in a timely, satisfactory manner, though the manager could never remember Preston's name. Preston turned to see the clock against the protest of his throbbing and stiffening neck. His hip made a crackling sound as he twisted. Damn, he sighed, staring at the clock reading 3:47 a.m. The silence of the night had a way of vexing his mind with regret of both far and recent memory. He understood why some people could only sleep with the distractions of a television or phone. In the soundless black, the unfiltered truth finally overtakes us on our backs. Sometimes the regret came in stomach aches and nausea. He hated the man in the mirror and avoided eye contact. He regretted his decisions. He regretted living only to fail at marriage, being alone with no lasting friendships, and at failing his father of never becoming more than what he was. He regretted being a post office mail handler, which was a mind-numbing occupation. In fact, after 17 years on the job, he feared his brain was no longer as sharp as it used to be. His father, before he died, when Preston was still a child, and the last time Preston felt alive, always thought his son would walk the hallowed halls of an Ivy League school. My son, he would say, the Harvard man, or the Yale man, or any of the others that came to his mind before hugging him tightly. But Preston failed to be the man his father wanted him to be. Instead, he became what his stepfather told him he would become, a nobody, a man of fear who never left home. Consequently, he lived only blocks away from the family house in a small substandard apartment. No, Dad, Preston sighed in the muted dark. I am Preston the sorry mailman. He reached blindly toward the nightstand and plucked a pill from a clear glass ashtray. The late-night cogitation was more torturous than the insomnia. Sleep, if only he could reach it, would be freeing. He placed the pill on his tongue and dry swallowed. Hopefully he would dream, leave to another place. Anywhere but where he was. Anywhere. And hopefully not another dream about work again. Or the awful nightmare of seeing himself lying on his bed, trying to sleep in accursed redundancy. A silent, incorporeal presence seemed to glide along the walls, dancing in the stillness. The rotating blades over his bed slowed and stretched, elongated. A small grin turned his lips. Finally, he was going to sleep. He rolled onto his stomach and adjusted the pillow beneath him, lengthwise burying his face in the cool pillowcase. In the twilight of dozing and dream, he felt the sensation of falling. He saw needle-prick lights whose weak illumination, at first dim, brightened and stretched into worm-like fluorescent tubes. Faces familiar and foreign, past and recent, appeared and vanished. Translucent sheets of red, purple, blue, and green appeared in flashes. He raced toward a bright star and felt its warmth and tranquil rays reaching for him, surrounding him. He is plunged into the baptismal depths of a dark sentient sea. The Aphelion distance was made apparent in the lonely light of dawn. A morning, shown in Aegean blue, crept in a low slanted gaze before transmuting into a rosy cast upon the eastern horizon. Warm rays reached the window, piercing weakly through the bedroom blinds. Preston jolted from the bed, his heart racing as he gasped for air. Without a moment of clarity, he blitzed his closet, fumbling through folded navy blue pants and thumbing through hung shirts for his sky blue postal top. Why didn't his alarm beep? A question that haloed his head, but its process supplied the answer. It was Tuesday, his day off. He steadied himself with a deep breath and returned to the bedroom where he slumped on the edge of his bed. He struggled to recount the doped-induced hallucination of the night. Looking towards the nightstand, he realized why he dreamt so oddly. He'd taken all the tablets, or at least the few remaining pills poured from the bottle into the ashtray. Preston noticed the absence of pain in his back as he twisted toward the nightstand. In fact, his body felt well rested without the accustomed aches of creaks and pops. He rotated his neck and limbs, his body full of suppressed energy. A smile shone on his face, and he hurried to the closed blinds and lifted them all the way up. He thumbed the latch and lifted the window open and was bathed in the coolness of the sweet morning air. Feeling unshackled for the first time since childhood, he succumbed to a primal push to do something he hadn't done in years: leave the tomb of an apartment and take in the day. Most of his neighbors were at work, and he was sure the atmosphere would be peaceful and unhurried. He turned the deadbolt, lifted the chain, and opened the door to the silent breezeway. There was no movement as he presumed, but as he turned to lock the door, he felt like he was under the gaze of someone down the hall, but saw no one but the silhouette of a tree swaying in the dawning wind. The sky blew beyond the blush into a gorgeous cloudless sapphire. The grass, the trees all the greenest he had ever seen them, or paid enough attention to notice. Even the birds' chirps seemed to be songs of new meaning. He ventured to the park where the breeze seemed to push and welcome him with the cheers of rustling leaves. Closing his eyes, he faced upward and stood for more than a moment, letting the sunshine warm his face. The grass was soft and comforting under his bare feet, and he laughed. He was outside in what he wore or didn't wear to bed, but he didn't care. "Am I high?" he chuckled, pacing the soft but satisfyingly prickly grass. The air was rippled from the Westminster chimes that tolled from the bells of the church. The belfry rose above the trees a block away in its continual melody before telling all of the 9th hour. Preston was never religious, but became fond of the hourly harmony. He did commit to memory some Sunday school teachings, but found the rigidity of holiness impossible, living to repent of a nature that subsisted on flesh and blood, always seeing the castle on the hill, but never good enough. An ongoing hamster wheel of hope, and when he did seek the face of God, he felt lost in a sea of people more holier than he, petitioning God in tears. As a young child, the statue's enameled faces of sadness and anger frightened Preston to the point of nightmares. However, deep down inside, he wanted to believe there was a loving, forgiving creator of all things. In a way, he never lost his want to understand and seek him, praying for guidance in the haze and morning fog. Today seemed different. He felt compelled to acknowledge God's existence in a thankful and heartfelt appreciation. Though his heart desired answers, he wouldn't ask questions. Just a simple thank you. Besides, the last time he asked questions, he was admonished or told, "The Lord works in mysterious ways." There were no answers for the hard questions, but simplistic reasoning. If it was good, God. If it was bad, the devil. If you were struggling and paid your 10th, it was a test. If you were struggling and didn't tithe, it was demons. The wind picked up again, and thoughts of his father nestled in his thinking. It's been years since he visited his father's grave. Maybe today was the day to visit the grave, and maybe give a little prayer. As he strolled through the park, he marveled at the vibrant bursts of color from the lush greenery and diverse patchwork of perennials. The tranquil ambiance of the park and its sparkling pond and fountain was a slice of paradise with angelic repose. Whimpers disturbed the peace. Preston looked around but saw no one at first glance. But down by the pond, there sat a young boy cradling his knees. Preston turned to walk away, and avoid the child, even considering returning to his apartment. He could see his apartment window from the park, dark and brooding, and decided any place was better than going back to that place and its icy loneliness. The boy was now quiet, but still cradled. Preston reminded himself of how useless he would be in this matter, but thought maybe a kind word or two to the child would be sufficient enough to help, or at least ease his own conscience. The boy looked up briefly over the rippling water and wiped his eyes. From around the park's brick bathroom facility, 9 other bantering boys came into sight, one carrying a football. Preston stopped yards away and leaned against a tree while facing the pond, but observing the children in his peripheral. The boy with the football tossed a perfect spiral into the back of the sitting boy, creating a deep, almost hollow thud. The boy yelled in pain. "Stop yelling, you fucking faggot, that didn't hurt you." A boy laughed. "Maybe it did. He is a homo," another boy yelled. "Shut up, I am not." The boy responded, teary-eyed and stumbling to his feet. "Sit your bitch ass back down." One of the boys chimed, pushing the boy back down to the ground. "Are you crying? Are you really crying?" The boys taunted, cackling like jackals. To Preston's horror, one of the boys mounted the poor, defenseless boy in a sexual manner kids their age should be oblivious to. "You know you like this," the boy said in a growl. "Look at him, he likes it. You want this dick?" They exploded in laughter once more. The struggling boy pleaded beneath the aggressor for mercy, but the bully slapped him continually in the face, then wrapped his arm around the boy's neck and commenced choking the boy. The boy gasped for air, his eyes widened and face turned blood red. Preston could not watch any longer and approached the boys. However, the boys abruptly fled at the yell of a man's voice, leaving the boy gasping in the fetal position. "He had enough, boys! Get!" a shirtless man shouted, approaching from the opposite direction. He stormed toward the hurt boy, snatched him off the ground, and shook him viciously. "You can't catch a goddamn football, boy!" the man yelled, yanking the boy's collar so hard it tore. "I should have let those boys beat the bitch out of you." The boy struggled to keep balance as the shirtless man pulled the boy so forcefully he dragged him. When the boy fell to the ground unable to catch up, he staggered wildly. "Get up, boy! Get the fuck up!" the man growled. The boy got up only to be met with an open-handed slap to the left side of his face. The man then grabbed the boy by the neck and they disappeared behind brush and trees out of sight. Preston stumbled back to the tree and leaned against it, regretting ever leaving the apartment, filled with contempt for both the ape of a man and his own seemingly inability to react to the inhumanity before him. Preston looked in the direction where the two disappeared. There was a tug-of-war inside him. He felt a little empathetic toward the poor boy. He too felt the bony knuckles of his stepfather, who hated him for his effeminate ways he got from being a mama's boy. There was no other name he was called by other than faggot or the occasional bitch boy. Preston felt obliged to not let the poor boy suffer from the pain he too went through at the hands of an ignorant fool. Tears welled and fell down his face, but his fists were clenched and ready to meet the flesh and bone of the fool's face. He feared what the boy would become if he did not save him. Preston trotted, then galloped into a full all-out sprint. He ran around the bathroom facility and up past the trees, through the open field where the kids played football to the other side towards the parking lot. He grunted and growled anxiously, wanting the confrontation with the man, wanting to save the boy from becoming what he hated most, himself. Nothing. The parking lot was empty. He'd waited too long, too taken back by the primal and animalistic behavior human beings were capable of exhibiting. Preston could only imagine the beating the poor boy was enduring. He failed him. The boy was probably getting his face smashed, and along with it, his self-esteem. Preston did not feel alone. He felt in a petri dish for prying eyes. Looking around, he saw no one but his own reflection in the window panes of the library across the parking lot. He stared at himself for a moment, like an enemy he'd not seen in a while or forgotten existed. He turned away sharply. It was over now, and there was nothing he could do to help the boy, so he continued his walk to this father. Though he was only a walk away, Preston never visited the old neighborhood much. It was full of bad memories, so he stayed in his apartment mostly, living only for the sake of living. It was kind of strange seeing the old neighborhood. Nothing changed. Around the back of the library were the basketball courts, the same rusted poles topped with white backboards, a rusted hoop, and rusted chain nets. He walked over the courts to one specific basketball pole. Sketched into it was a heart, and in the center was written, "Preston loves Danielle." Preston rubbed his fingers across the etching, done so long ago with a pocket knife. A smile crest his lips at the only time he could remember, after his father's death, where he was happy. Danielle was beautiful, intelligent, and more worthy of a man of her stature, which she later got after their divorce. She took everything and even gave him a pitiful pat on the back when she walked out the door. The smile disappeared as the warm memory cooled to bitter recollection. Moore was upset with himself and his inability to hate her, or at least be screaming mad. But he was not. He was happy she was happy. How pitiful can you be, he thought. She was the one who cheated on him, then left him feeling so guilty he thought about taking his own life. Preston looked up, and behind him, still wondering if he was being followed before moving on, a clatter of snapping wood and shattering glass. In front of the old Quincy's bar, a young man on his stomach with a shattered bottle of alcohol at his sprawled-out left hand. He apparently stumbled off the stairs and into a wooden chair that aligned the tables along the sidewalk. The young man staggered to his feet to either the amusement or distaste of passerbys. The young man's legs wobbled and he faltered into the building's wall. What da hell y'all looking at?" the young man slurred. "Mind your own damn business?" Preston kept his distance with the crowd, shaking his head in both embarrassment and disgust for the young man. "You all judge me? Well, fuck you!" the man cried, falling down on his butt, dejected and wallowing in his own despair. "God help me, please." The young man sighed softly before vomiting onto his own lap. The hacking and gagging irritated Preston, who wanted to go over and kick the man. He stood directly across the street from the drunkard, despising the weakness and self-pity on full display. The man was a disgrace to himself, and had no understanding of how much of a fool he was, the failure he was, how no one cared. The crowd continued on their way after the spectacle lost its entertainment value and the stench of vomit became unbearable. For a moment, Preston realized why he stayed in his prison of an apartment most of his time. The world was cruel, depressing, and cold, and his past a much dismal place. It was better to lock oneself away from the pain of life than to try to face it only to become a dismal failure, like the beaten man lying on the street in his own vomit. Preston gave the young man one last eye before continuing along the road. He was not alone. There was no doubt he was being followed, but refused to turn around to see who it was. Preston opted to let the stranger follow him instead of confronting whoever it was. At the end of the road was the cemetery. The cemetery was atop of a hill, surveying the entire town like an omniscient judge. Lots of thoughts and emotions were conjured from the mere sight of the hill. Some Preston wished to suppress. He passed the bars and cafes and approached the industrial district. There he began to hear the banging, clanking, rumbling, and yelling emitting from the different warehouses. One of the depot's garage door was lifted, and Preston took a peek inside. Inside, men worked bundling boxes and forklifting finished pallets into an awaiting flatbed truck. One sad-looking employee, drenched in sweat, was vigorously stacking boxes, seemingly unplugged from his surroundings. Preston stepped inside the huge garage door, not to silhouette himself, and to stay hidden behind a large plastic-wrapped pallet. In the corner, adjacent to the sad man, were suited men laughing and whispering to each other, signaling the other employees to hand the sad man their work. Upon a closer view, he could see that the sad man was swaying and behaving like a man with a hint of some mental shortcoming, and he was their amusement. After an hour of watching the man, he noticed the other employees would pile some of their work on him and disappear from sight, leaving the man with an abundance of back-breaking work. He was a slave by any other name. Preston Bax stepped out of the warehouse and headed back onto the street. There was nothing at all nostalgic of what he was seeing, no redemptive value to consider. It was the remembrance of a life as dry as dead bones. It was the redundant dance one takes into death. The proverbial life flashing before one's eyes before entering the realm of the unknown. He could not find anything worth living for, nor one gem to show God and say, "This is why I deserved life thus far," because those were the highlights. With a bowed head and slumped shoulders, he walked toward the cemetery where he sat down at the base of the steps that led up to the iron gates. Preston began to weep deeply and hugged himself like he did so long ago at the pond. Beaten, he felt the stranger approaching him, then stood silently over him. Preston refused to lift his head, only raising his hand toward the stranger with an exhausted sigh. "I'm ready,"